The howling wind slammed against Catherine Turner's cabin with such force that she feared the walls themselves might surrender to nature's fury. February 1885 brought the worst blizzard San Angelo, Texas had seen in decades, a white monster that had been raging for 3 days straight with no signs of letting up. Catherine huddled closer to the dying embers in her stone fireplace, wrapping the threadbare quilt tighter around her shoulders. At 25, Catherine had grown accustomed to solitude since her father's passing last spring, but tonight the isolation pressed on her like a physical weight. The cabin that once felt like a sanctuary now creaked and groaned with each gust, sounding more like a wounded animal than the home her father had built with his own hands 15 years earlier. "Just hold together one more night," she whispered, as though the walls could hear her plea. The flickering light from her single oil lamp cast long shadows across the wooden floor, and she tried not to think about how the firewood stack had dwindled to almost nothing. 10 miles from town meant 10 miles from help. Catherine had refused her neighbor Mrs. Green's invitation to weather the storm at her family's larger home. Pride, perhaps, or the stubborn Turner spirit her father had instilled in her. Now, as another violent gust rattled the windows, she was beginning to regret that decision. The first crack came suddenly, a sharp, splintering sound from somewhere above that made Catherine's blood run cold. She looked up at the ceiling beams just as a second, louder crack echoed through the cabin, followed by the unmistakable sound of wood giving way. "No, no, no," she breathed, rushing to grab her coat and boots. But it was too late. With a deafening roar, the roof caved in on one side, bringing a cascade of snow, wood, and freezing air into her home. The impact knocked her to the ground, a heavy beam pinning her legs beneath its weight. Pain shot through her left ankle as she struggled to free herself, but the beam wouldn't budge. Panic seized her chest as snow continued to pour through the gaping hole, quickly covering everything in sight. The temperature plummeted instantly, and Catherine's breath came in visible puffs as she called out, knowing full well that no one could possibly hear her through the howling wind. "Help!" she screamed anyway, her voice lost in the blizzard's rage. "Somebody, please help me!" But the only response was the wind's mournful howl, and the continuing collapse of the cabin she had called home all her life. Elias Reed pulled his hat lower against the stinging snow and leaned forward in his saddle, squinting to see more than 5 feet ahead. The unexpected blizzard had caught him between towns, forcing him to seek shelter anywhere he could find it. Thunder, his faithful paint horse, trudged forward through drifts that reached past his knees in some places. "Just a bit further, boy," Elias encouraged, though he wasn't sure where they were headed. At 32, he'd survived worse situations than this, but not many. 8 years of drifting across the Western Territories had taught him to respect nature's fury, and this storm demanded respect. Elias had left San Angelo 3 days earlier, headed for a ranch outside of Abilene where he'd heard they needed experienced hands. The storm had forced him to circle back, looking for any sign of shelter. His beard was crusted with ice, and he could no longer feel his toes despite the thick wool socks and sturdy boots he wore. Thunder suddenly stopped, ears perking forward, head raised against the driving snow. "What is it, boy?" Elias asked, straining to hear anything besides the howling wind. The horse snorted, pawing at the ground nervously. Then Elias heard it too, a faint cry carried on the wind. Human or animal, he couldn't tell, but Thunder was already turning toward the sound without prompting. "Go on," Elias said, giving the horse his head. "Find it." Thunder pressed forward with newfound determination, veering off what Elias thought might be a road and heading toward a stand of trees barely visible through the whiteout. As they drew closer, Elias could make out the dark shape of what appeared to be a cabin, or what remained of one. Half the roof had caved in, and even as he watched, another section collapsed. Then he heard it again, definitely human this time. A woman's voice calling for help. "Whoa," he said, pulling Thunder to a stop and quickly dismounting. His feet sank deep into the snow as he tied the horse to a nearby tree branch, sheltered somewhat from the direct force of the wind. "Hello," he called out, trudging toward the collapsing structure. "Anyone in there? Help," came the desperate reply. "I'm trapped." Elias approached cautiously, aware that the rest of the structure could give way at any moment. Through the gaping hole in the roof, he could see furniture buried under snow and debris. Then he spotted her, a woman pinned beneath a heavy roof beam, her face pale with cold and fear. "Hold on," he called, assessing the safest way to enter. One wall had partially collapsed, creating an opening he could squeeze through. "I'm coming in. Please hurry," she called back, her voice weakening. "The cold. I can't feel my legs anymore." Elias forced his way through the opening, ducking under hanging debris. Inside, the scene was chaotic: snow everywhere, furniture crushed, a fire nearly extinguished in the hearth. And in the middle of it all, a young woman with auburn hair and frightened blue eyes staring up at him like he was an apparition. "Thank God," she breathed. "Don't thank him just yet, madam," Elias said, kneeling beside her to examine the beam that trapped her. "We've still got to get you out of here before the rest comes down." "Who are you?" she asked through chattering teeth. "Name's Elias Reed," he said, testing the weight of the beam. "Just passing through when I heard you call." "Catherine Turner," she replied. I can't move it, I've tried." Elias nodded grimly. "It's going to take both of us." He looked around quickly, spotting a broken chair leg that might serve as a lever. "This place isn't going to stand much longer. When I lift, you need to pull yourself free no matter how much it hurts. Can you do that?" Catherine nodded, determination replacing some of the fear in her eyes. "I can do it. On 3, then." Elias wedged the makeshift lever under the beam. 1, 2, 3. With all his strength, he pushed down on the lever, raising the beam just enough. Catherine cried out in pain but clawed at the floor, dragging herself backward until her legs were clear of the weight. No sooner had she freed herself than another ominous crack sounded above them. Elias dropped the lever and lunged forward, covering Catherine's body with his own as more of the roof gave way, sending debris crashing down where they'd been moments before. "We need to get out now," he said, already scooping her into his arms. Her body felt small and frighteningly cold against his chest. "My things." Catherine protested weakly, looking around at her collapsing home. "Your life matters more than things," Elias said firmly, carrying her toward the opening he'd used to enter. "We can come back for whatever survives once the storm passes." Just as he cleared the collapsed wall, the remainder of the roof caved in with a thunderous crash. Catherine gasped, turning her face into his chest as her home disappeared under snow and broken timber. "Thunder's this way," Elias said, trudging through the snow toward his horse. "He's strong enough to carry us both to shelter." "Where?" Catherine asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Town's too far in this weather." "I passed a line shack about 2 miles back," Elias replied. "Not much, but it had 4 walls and a roof. Better than this." He settled her onto Thunder's back before mounting behind her, wrapping one arm around her waist to keep her secure. She was shivering violently now, a dangerous sign in this cold. "Lean back against me," he instructed, pulling his heavy coat open enough to wrap part of it around her. "We need to keep you warm." Catherine didn't protest, too cold and in too much pain to maintain proper distance from this stranger. As Thunder began moving, Elias felt her gradually relax against his chest, her head tucking beneath his chin. "Stay awake, Catherine," he said firmly when he felt her growing too still. "Talk to me. Tell me how long you've been out here." "All my life," she murmured. "That was my father's cabin. He built it when I was 10. Where is your father now?" "Dead, last spring, pneumonia." Her words were becoming slurred, a bad sign. Elias tightened his arm around her. "And no other family, just me now." "Well, you've got company for tonight at least," Elias said, urging Thunder to move faster despite the dangerous conditions. "Keep talking, Catherine. Tell me about your father." As they made their way through the blinding snow, Catherine spoke haltingly about her father, a former cavalry scout who'd settled in the San Angelo area after the war. Elias listened, commenting occasionally, his main goal to keep her conscious and talking. Thunder seemed to sense the urgency, picking his way carefully but quickly through the drifts. After what felt like hours but was likely less than 40 minutes, the dim outline of the line shack appeared through the swirling snow. "There it is," Elias said with relief. "Just hold on a little longer." The simple one-room structure was little more than a shelter for cowboys working the range, but right now it looked like a palace to Elias's tired eyes. He dismounted carefully, keeping one hand on Catherine to prevent her from falling, then lifted her down into his arms again. "I need to get Thunder settled first," he explained, carrying her to the shack's door. "He saved both our lives today." Inside, the shack was bare but found a small iron stove in one corner, a narrow cot against the wall, a rough-hewn table and single chair the only furnishings. Elias laid Catherine on the cot. "I'll be right back," he promised, pulling his coat off and covering her with it. "Don't fall asleep yet." Outside, he quickly unsaddled Thunder and led him to the lean-to attached to the back of the shack. It wasn't much protection, but it would keep the worst of the storm off the loyal animal. Elias gave him an extra measure of oats from his saddlebags, before gathering his gear and Catherine's small satchel that had been tied to Thunder's saddle. When he returned inside, Catherine's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. "Catherine," he said sharply, setting down his things and moving to her side. "Open your eyes." Her lids fluttered. "So tired." "I know, but you can't sleep yet." He began working quickly, building a fire in the small stove with the dry wood stacked beside it. "We need to get you warm first." As the fire caught, Elias turned his attention to Catherine's injuries. Her ankle was swollen badly, possibly broken, and her hands showed signs of frostbite. The rest of her was dangerously cold. "This isn't proper," he said apologetically, "but you need to get out of those wet clothes. You'll never warm up otherwise." A weak blush colored her pale cheeks. "Turn around," she whispered. Elias nodded, giving her what privacy he could in the small space. He heard the rustle of fabric as she struggled with her sodden dress. "I can't." "My fingers won't work," she finally admitted, frustration in her voice. Elias steeled himself. "I've got a clean shirt in my saddlebag. You can wear that, but you'll need help." Catherine was silent for a long moment before replying. "All right." With clinical efficiency and eyes averted as much as possible, Elias helped her out of her wet clothes and into his dry shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. He wrapped his blanket around her as well, then gently examined her ankle. "Not broken, I think, but badly sprained," he concluded. "We'll need to keep it elevated." Catherine nodded, her teeth still chattering despite the growing warmth from the stove. "Thank you," she said simply. "I would have died in there." "Anyone would have done the same," Elias replied, pouring water from his canteen into a tin cup and setting it on the stove to heat. "No," Catherine said with surprising firmness. "Most would have ridden past, especially in this storm." Elias didn't argue. He'd seen enough of human nature to know she was probably right. Once the water was hot, he added coffee from his provisions. "Drink this," he said, helping her sit up. "It'll warm you from the inside." Catherine took the cup in both hands, letting the heat seep into her fingers before sipping carefully. Color was slowly returning to her face, and her shivering had subsided to occasional tremors. "What were you doing out in this weather, Mr. Reed?" she asked after a few minutes of silence. "Elias," he corrected, "and I was headed to Abilene for work when the storm caught me. Thought I could outrun it," he smiled ruefully. "I was wrong. You're not from around here." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "No, madam, I move around, been doing so since the war ended." "You fought," Elias nodded, turning to add more wood to the stove. "Union cavalry. Afterward couldn't settle anywhere that felt right, so I just kept moving." Catherine studied him over the rim of her cup. "And now you're here." "Now I'm here," he agreed, "at least until this storm breaks." Outside, the wind howled with undiminished fury, rattling the shack's single window. Catherine's gaze drifted to it, her expression growing distant. "Everything I owned was in that cabin," she said quietly. "Everything my father built." Elias didn't offer empty assurances. Instead, he said, "We'll go back once it's safe. Some things might have survived." Catherine nodded, but her eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. "I should have gone to the Greens like they asked. Stubborn pride. My father always said it would be my downfall." "Pride's kept plenty of people alive too," Elias observed. "Can't fault yourself for wanting to protect your home." A small, appreciative smile touched her lips before exhaustion overtook her features. Elias took the now empty cup from her hands. "You should rest now," he said, helping her lie back down. "Your body's been through a lot." "Where will you sleep?" she asked, already half drifting. "Don't worry about me," he replied, pulling the blankets more securely around her. "I've slept in worse places than a floor." Catherine wanted to protest, but weariness claimed her before she could form the words. Elias watched as her breathing deepened and evened out, relieved to see her safely asleep rather than unconscious from the cold. He settled himself on the floor near the stove, his back against the wall, his gun within easy reach, a habit he'd never broken since the war. Outside, the blizzard showed no signs of abating, but inside, for the first time in longer than he cared to remember, Elias felt a curious sense of peace. The storm lasted 3 more days. 3 days confined in a space not much bigger than a prison cell, with a woman who alternated between fierce independence and reluctant vulnerability. Elias found himself drawn to both sides of her nature. Catherine's ankle improved enough that she could hop around the tiny shack with the aid of a makeshift crutch Elias had fashioned from a broken chair leg, though he insisted on helping her more than she thought necessary. Their initial awkwardness gradually gave way to an easy camaraderie born of shared circumstances and mutual respect. By the second day, they had established a routine. Elias would wake first, stoke the fire, and melt snow for water. Catherine would organize their dwindling supplies and prepare whatever simple meal they could manage from Elias's saddlebags and the emergency provisions stored in the lined shack. They talked more than Elias had talked to anyone in years. Catherine told him about growing up on the frontier, about her father teaching her to shoot and ride and survive, about her mother who had died when she was 8, leaving just the two of them against the world. Elias shared stories of his own selective at first, then more openly as Catherine proved to be a good listener without judgment. He told her about his family's farm in Pennsylvania, about joining the Union Army at 19, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him. "What will you do when the snow clears?" he asked on the 3rd night as they sat side by side on the cot, sharing the last of his coffee. Catherine stared into her cup. "I don't know. Rebuild, I suppose, if anything's left." "Alone?" She looked up at him then, a challenge in her blue eyes. "I've managed alone this past year." "Never said you couldn't," Elias replied mildly. "Just wondering if you want to." The question hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Catherine broke eye contact first, turning to look at the fire. "Doesn't much matter what I want," she said finally. "It's what is." Elias nodded, respecting her deflection. "Well, before you start rebuilding anything, we should see what's left, and you'll need that ankle looked at by a proper doctor." "Town's 10 miles away," Catherine reminded him. "And I'm not exactly fit to ride." "Thunder can handle it," Elias assured her, "and I'll be right behind you in the saddle." Catherine's cheeks colored slightly at the reminder of their close proximity during the ride to the shack. "I suppose I don't have much choice." "There are always choices," Elias said quietly. "Just sometimes none of them are good ones." On the morning of the 4th day, they awoke to silence. The howling wind finally stilled. Sunlight streamed through the small window, reflecting blindingly off the pristine white landscape outside. "Storms past," Elias observed unnecessarily, already pulling on his boots. Catherine nodded, looking both relieved and apprehensive. "I need to see what's left of my home." "We will," Elias promised. "But town first. You need that ankle seen to, and we both could use supplies." She wanted to argue, but the practical part of her knew he was right. They'd been rationing the last of the food, and her ankle, while improved, still throbbed painfully when she put weight on it. "All right," she agreed. "Town first." Getting to San Angelo proved more challenging than anticipated. The snow had drifted in some places to heights taller than a man, forcing them to find alternative routes. What should have been a few hours' journey stretched into most of the day. Thunder carried them both without complaint, though Elias frequently dismounted to lead the horse through particularly difficult stretches, leaving Catherine alone in the saddle. Each time he helped her back down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. She felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time, if ever. The sun was low in the western sky by the time the buildings of San Angelo came into view. Despite the storm's aftermath, the town was showing signs of life, smoke rising from chimneys, a few hardy souls digging paths through the snow, the saloon already lit and likely doing good business. "Where to first?" Elias asked as they approached the main street. "Dr. Fleming's office," Catherine decided. "It's just past the general store." Heads turned as Elias led Thunder down the street, carrying both a woman in man's clothing and clear evidence of having weathered the storm away from town. Catherine recognized several faces, nodding politely but offering no explanations. Elias noted her reticence with interest. "Not much for town gossip?" he asked quietly. "They talk enough without my help," she replied with a hint of defiance. "Been talking since Pa died and I stayed on the homestead alone." Elias nodded, understanding. Small towns had long memories and rigid expectations, especially for women. Dr. Fleming's office was a small wooden building with a shingle proclaiming his profession hanging askew from the recent winds. Elias tied Thunder to the hitching post and helped Catherine down, supporting her as she hopped up the steps. The doctor, a gray-haired man with spectacles and a perpetually tired expression, looked up from his desk when they entered. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Catherine. "Miss Turner," he said, standing quickly, "we feared the worst when no one could reach your cabin during the storm." "The worst nearly happened," Catherine admitted, allowing Elias to help her to a chair. "My roof collapsed. Mr. Reed pulled me from the rubble, Doctor." Fleming's assessing gaze shifted to Elias, who met it steadily. Whatever the doctor was looking for, he seemed satisfied with what he found. "Well then, Mr. Reed, you have my thanks," he said, turning his attention to Catherine's ankle. Let's have a look at the damage. The examination was brief but thorough. Severe sprain, the doctor confirmed Elias's amateur diagnosis. You're lucky it wasn't broken. Stay off it for at least 2 weeks. I'll wrap it properly, but you'll need to rest. I need to see what's left of my home, Catherine protested. It can wait another day, Dr. Fleming said firmly. That ankle needs elevation and cold compresses, not a trek through snow drifts. Before Catherine could argue further, the door opened, admitting Mrs. Green, a plump, motherly woman who gasped at the sight of Catherine. Catherine Turner. Oh, thank the Lord you're alive. She rushed forward, enveloping Catherine in a tight embrace before holding her at arm's length to examine her. When Samuel rode out yesterday and saw your cabin, we feared the worst. Mrs. Green, Catherine said with genuine warmth. I would have been lost if not for Mr. Reed. Mrs. Green turned to Elias, sizing him up with a shrewd eye. Then we're all in your debt, Mr. Reed. Where did you find her? As Elias briefly recounted the rescue, Catherine watched Mrs. Green's expression shift from concern to something more calculating. She knew that look. It was the same one the woman wore when trying to match local girls with eligible bachelors. You'll stay with us, of course, Mrs. Green announced once Elias had finished. Both of you. Samuel has already started clearing the road to your property, Catherine, but it will be days before it's passable, and you need proper care for that ankle. Catherine opened her mouth to refuse, but Dr. Fleming interjected. That would be best, Catherine. You need rest and proper care. Caught between the doctor's medical authority and Mrs. Green's formidable hospitality, Catherine found herself outnumbered. Thank you, she conceded, but just for a day or two. As long as necessary, Mrs. Green corrected, already making plans aloud. We've plenty of room since the boys moved to their own places. Samuel can lend Mr. Reed some clean clothes, and I'll find something suitable for you, Catherine. Can't have you running around in men's shirts, no matter the circumstances. Elias caught Catherine's eye over Mrs. Green's head and offered a small, sympathetic smile that unexpectedly warmed her from the inside out. In that moment of shared understanding, something shifted between them, a recognition that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The Green farm was a substantial property, 3 miles outside of town, close enough for convenience, but far enough to provide privacy and space. The large 2-story house spoke of years of prosperity and hard work, with a well-maintained barn and several outbuildings arranged neatly around a central yard. Samuel Green, a tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes, greeted them at the door. Miss Turner, good to see you in one piece, he said, helping her from the wagon they had borrowed for the journey from town. And you must be the cowboy who pulled her out, Samuel Green. He extended a work-roughened hand to Elias. Elias Reed, Elias replied, shaking the offered hand. Thank you for your hospitality. Least we can do, Samuel said, leading them inside where the warmth of a well-maintained hearth and the smell of cooking food created an immediate sense of comfort. The Greens' 2 daughters-in-law, Mary and Elizabeth, had prepared a hearty meal, and despite her exhaustion, Catherine found herself ravenous after days of rationed provisions. Elias too ate with appreciation, though she noticed he maintained the careful manners that had surprised her during their confinement in the line shack. Afterward, while the women cleared the dishes, Samuel invited Elias to join him for a pipe on the porch. Catherine watched them go, feeling a strange reluctance to see Elias walk away, even temporarily. He's a handsome one, Mrs. Green observed, following Catherine's gaze, and capable too from what you've told us. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. He saved my life. I'm grateful, nothing more. Mrs. Green's knowing smile suggested she believed otherwise, but she didn't press the issue. "The guest room at the end of the hall is ready for him, and you'll take the blue room upstairs, though you'll need help with those stairs, I expect." "I can manage," Catherine said automatically. "Pride's a fine quality until it becomes foolishness," Mrs. Green replied, echoing Elias's earlier sentiment so closely that Catherine blinked in surprise. "Accept help when it's offered in good faith, child. There's no weakness in that." Later, as Elias helped her navigate the stairs despite her token protests, Catherine pondered the woman's words. Her independent nature had served her well after her father's death, but these past few days had taught her something about the value of companionship, and not just for practical survival. "Thank you," she said quietly when they reached the door to her room. "Not just for this, for everything." Elias's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Get some rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to face whatever comes next." Catherine nodded, suddenly reluctant to end the moment. "Good night, Elias." "Good night, Catherine." He waited until she was safely inside before heading back downstairs, his footsteps fading along the hallway. Alone in the comfortable room with its patchwork quilt and lace curtains, Catherine found herself thinking not of her collapsed home or uncertain future, but of a man with steady hands and quiet strength, who had appeared out of a blizzard when she needed him most. The next morning brought clear skies and the beginnings of a thaw. After breakfast, Samuel announced that the road to Catherine's property was now passable. "Not easy going," he cautioned, "but possible if you're determined." "I am," Catherine said firmly. 4 days of not knowing what remained of her home and possessions had left her increasingly anxious. "Then I'll take you," Elias offered. "If Mr. Green can spare a wagon." Samuel nodded. "Take the small one, less likely to get stuck." Mrs. Green packed them food and insisted Catherine take a heavy coat she claimed belonged to her daughter, who had no use for it these days. The older woman's matchmaking intentions were transparent, but Catherine accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. The journey to her property was slow and jarring, the wagon struggling through half-cleared paths and melting snow that turned the ground treacherous. Catherine sat beside Elias on the seat, acutely aware of his presence, the way he handled the reins with confident ease, the profile of his face beneath his hat, the occasional brush of his arm against hers when the wagon jolted. "Nervous?" he asked as they approached the final bend before her property would come into view. "Yes," she admitted. "Whatever's left, it's all I have." Elias's free hand covered hers briefly. "Not all," he said quietly, then returned his attention to the horses as they rounded the curve. Catherine's breath caught at the sight that greeted them. Her cabin, or what remained of it, was little more than a pile of timber and snow. The stone chimney still stood, a solitary sentinel over the wreckage, but the rest had completely collapsed. "Oh," she breathed, the simple sound containing all her shock and grief. Elias stopped the wagon and helped her down, supporting her as she hobbled closer to the ruins of her home. Up close, the destruction was even more complete than it had appeared from a distance. The heavy snowfall had protected some items from the elements, but the structural damage was catastrophic. "I'm sorry," Elias said softly, his hand steady at her elbow. Catherine nodded mutely, surveying the scene with a practical eye despite her emotional turmoil. "The root cellar might be intact," she said after a moment. "It was built separate from the main structure, with its own entrance." They made their way around the collapsed cabin to where a small mound of snow suggested the root cellar's location. Elias dug away the snow to reveal a sturdy wooden door set into the ground at an angle. "Still secure," he noted with approval, pulling it open. Below, accessed by a short set of steps, was a small underground room lined with shelves. Canned preserves, dried herbs, and other non-perishable food items were stored neatly alongside tools, seed packets for spring planting, and several crates containing household items Catherine's father had deemed worthy of special protection. "Your father was a forward-thinking man," Elias observed, helping her down the steps. "Most of this looks untouched." "He always planned for the worst," Catherine said, running her fingers over a crate containing her mother's china. "Said it was better to be prepared and pleasantly surprised than caught off guard." They spent the next hour taking inventory of the cellar's contents and retrieving items that could be transported in the wagon. Elias insisted on doing the heavy lifting, though Catherine directed his efforts with clear authority. "These seeds represent next year's crops," she explained as he loaded a wooden box into the wagon. "And this crate has the deed to the property and what little money my father saved." As the day progressed, they managed to salvage more from the cabin ruins than Catherine had dared hope. A trunk containing most of her clothing had been protected by falling in such a way that snow hadn't penetrated it. Several pieces of cookware were dented but serviceable, and her father's rifle was recovered intact from beneath a fallen beam. "It's not as bad as it could have been," Elias said encouragingly as they surveyed their haul. Catherine nodded, though her expression remained somber. "The structure is beyond repair," she acknowledged. "I'll have to rebuild completely." "Not alone," Elias said before he could stop himself. Catherine turned to him, a question in her eyes. "What do you mean?" Elias hesitated, suddenly unsure of his footing in this conversation. 4 days in a line shack and 1 night under the Greens' roof hardly constituted a foundation for what he was considering. And yet, "I'm good with my hands," he said carefully. "Worked as a carpenter for a while in Colorado. I could help if you wanted." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked, her voice soft but direct. "You were headed to Abilene for work, you said." "Plans change," Elias replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "Sometimes for the better." The air between them seemed to still, the only sound the distant drip of melting snow and the occasional stamp of the horses' hooves. Catherine studied his face as though searching for something. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "Not much, anyway. I'm not asking for payment." "Then what are you asking for, Elias Reed?" It was a fair question, and one he wasn't entirely sure how to answer. He'd spent 8 years drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. Yet something about this woman and this place called to a part of him he'd thought long buried. "A chance," he said simply, "to see if there's something worth building here, and I don't just mean a cabin." Catherine's cheeks colored, but she held his gaze. "That's forward." "We nearly died in that blizzard," Elias pointed out. "Makes a man reconsider how much time he wants to waste on being indirect." A small smile touched her lips. "My father would have liked you, I think. He had no patience for pretense either." "Is that a yes?" "It's a we'll see," Catherine clarified, but the smile remained. "I do need help rebuilding, and I suppose having you around a while longer wouldn't be the worst thing." Elias grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. "High praise indeed, Miss Turner." "Don't let it go to your head, Mr. Reed." But there was warmth in her voice that belied the formal address. They loaded the last of the salvageable items as the afternoon light began to wane. Before climbing back into the wagon, Catherine took a final look at the ruins of her childhood home. "We'll build it better," Elias said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Catherine nodded, surprising him by slipping her hand into his. "Yes," she agreed. "I believe we will." Spring came early that year, the snow melting to reveal muddy earth eager for new growth. True to his word, Elias stayed, initially taking a room at the boarding house in town while Catherine remained with the Greens. But most days found him at her property, clearing debris and preparing the site for rebuilding. Samuel Green and several other neighbors helped when they could, impressed by Elias's work ethic and obvious skill. By the time the ground had dried enough for proper construction to begin, the foundation was laid and lumber delivered from the sawmill in San Angelo. Catherine visited daily once her ankle healed, often bringing food and staying to help where she could. Their partnership evolved naturally, her practical knowledge of the property complementing his construction experience. They worked well together, developing an unspoken language of glances and gestures that didn't go unnoticed by the neighbors who came to help. "That man's not going anywhere," Mrs. Green observed one evening as Catherine helped prepare dinner. "You know that, don't you?" Catherine concentrated on the potatoes she was peeling. "He hasn't said as much, hasn't he?" Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps not in words. Indeed, though Elias had made no further declaration since that day at the ruins, his actions spoke volumes. The care he took with the cabin design, incorporating features he'd noticed Catherine admiring in other homes. The garden plot he prepared, larger than the original. The stable he insisted on building first, suitable for not just one horse but several, and a milk cow. "He's building a future," Samuel told his wife when he thought Catherine couldn't hear. "Not just a cabin." By late April, the cabin's frame stood complete, larger and sturdier than the original structure. Catherine watched with pride as Elias directed the raising of the roof, his quiet authority earning respect even from men who had initially viewed the stranger with suspicion. "It's taking shape," she said when he joined her after the day's work, wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Another month and you'll be able to move in," he confirmed, satisfaction evident in his voice, "though there will still be finishing work to do inside." Catherine nodded, looking past the cabin to where the sun was setting over the distant hills. "I've been thinking," she said carefully. "A dangerous pastime," Elias teased, though his expression grew serious when he saw her face. "What about? About what happens when it's finished?" She turned to face him fully. "When you have no reason to stay anymore." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what you think? That I'm just here to build a cabin? Why else would you stay?" Catherine challenged softly. "You've never been one to settle, by your own admission. Maybe I never had a reason before." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Catherine, I thought I'd made my intentions clear." "You said you wanted a chance," she reminded him, "to see if there was something worth building. And haven't we been building it? Not just this," he gestured to the cabin frame, "but us." Catherine's heart beat faster. "Have we?" In answer, Elias reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I think you know we have. The question is, do you want it to continue?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "I do." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the hills. "Good," he said simply, then bent to kiss her with a gentleness that belied his strength. It was their first kiss, but it carried the weight of months of growing feelings and shared purpose. When they finally parted, Catherine felt as though something fundamental had shifted into its proper place. "Mrs. Green will be insufferably pleased with herself," she murmured, making Elias laugh. "She's been dropping hints since that first night," he agreed, "along with half the town." "We've been the subject of gossip then. The mysterious drifter and the independent homesteader," Elias grinned. "We never stood a chance at privacy." Catherine didn't mind, she realized. After years of solitude, there was something reassuring about being part of a community that cared enough to speculate about her happiness. The cabin was completed by early June, a sturdy two-room structure with a loft above and a wide porch facing the creek. It was simple but solid, built to withstand whatever nature might throw at it, including Texas blizzards. On the day Catherine was to move in, Elias arrived at the Greens' house earlier than expected, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Everything all right at the cabin?" she asked when Mrs. Green showed him into the parlor. "Perfect," he assured her. "But there's something I need to ask you before we go." Mrs. Green made a poorly disguised excuse to leave the room, closing the door behind her with a knowing smile. Catherine raised an eyebrow at Elias, who shook his head with amused exasperation. "That woman," he muttered, then took a deep breath. "Catherine, I've been thinking about what you said about when the cabin is finished." "Yes," Catherine's pulse quickened. "I don't want it to be the end of something," Elias continued, taking her hands in his. "I want it to be the beginning." From his pocket, he produced a small ring, a simple gold band with a single modest diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it all these years, never thinking I'd have cause to use it. Until now." Catherine stared at the ring, then at the man holding it, no longer a stranger who had appeared in a blizzard, but the person who had become essential to her life in ways she hadn't imagined possible. "Catherine Turner," Elias said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Will you marry me? Not because you need help rebuilding or because it's practical, but because I love you and can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears blurred her vision, but Catherine's voice was clear and certain. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." The sound of muffled applause from the other side of the door made them both laugh. "I think we have an audience," Elias observed, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Let them listen," Catherine replied, pulling him closer for a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared tomorrows. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in San Angelo, with the Greens standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Afterward, they drove the wagon to their new home, their home as husband and wife. Standing on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine leaned against Elias's solid presence beside her. "Hard to believe it's been less than 6 months since the blizzard," she mused. "Sometimes it feels like you've always been here." Elias's arm tightened around her waist. "Maybe in some ways I was meant to be," he said. "Just took a storm to blow me in the right direction." "Thank goodness for terrible weather," Catherine said with a smile, turning in his embrace to face him. "Thank goodness for stubborn women who won't leave their cabins," Elias countered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Even when common sense says they should." "If I'd had common sense, you never would have found me." "I'd like to think I would have, one way or another," Elias said softly. "Some things are just meant to be." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Catherine silently agreed. From disaster had come her greatest blessing, not just a rebuilt home, but a rebuilt life, with a man who had shown her that independence didn't have to mean being alone. The cabin stood strong against the horizon, a testament to what they had created together. But the true building project, Catherine knew, was just beginning the lifetime they would share, weathering whatever storms might come, safe in the shelter of each other's love. 5 years later, the property had transformed beyond recognition. What had once been a simple homestead was now a thriving small ranch, with a herd of cattle, several horses, and fields of crops that provided both sustenance and income. The cabin had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, first with the addition of a proper kitchen and dining area, then with extra bedrooms for the children. 4-year-old Thomas, named for Catherine's father, had his father's steady nature and his mother's blue eyes. 2-year-old Emma was all energy and determination, keeping both parents constantly on their toes. And the newest addition, baby James, just 3 months old, completed their family circle with his contented disposition and winning smile. The blizzard that had brought them together became a story told and retold, gaining almost mythical status among the children of San Angelo. The cowboy who rescued the lady from the storm was a favorite bedtime tale, though Elias always insisted that Catherine had saved herself just as much as he had saved her. "We saved each other," became his standard response whenever anyone praised his heroism. And Catherine knew it to be true. She had given him a home and purpose when he'd been drifting, just as he had given her strength and companionship when she needed it most. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, Elias surprised Catherine with a special gift, a small wooden box, intricately carved with images of snowflakes and cabin beams. "What's this?" she asked, tracing the delicate patterns with her finger. "Open it," Elias encouraged, watching her face with anticipation. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a silver locket. Catherine opened it to find a tiny sketch on one side, an impressively detailed rendering of their original cabin, and on the other, the date of the blizzard that had changed everything. "It's beautiful," Catherine whispered, immediately fastening it around her neck. "How did you manage to keep this a secret?" "I have my ways," Elias replied with a mysterious smile. "Had it made in San Antonio last time I went to sell the cattle." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing that had been Elias's gift to her on their first anniversary. The night was clear and cold, stars strewn across the sky like diamond dust. "Any regrets?" Elias asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. Catherine considered the question, thinking back to the frightened, trapped woman she had been that winter day, certain she would die alone in the ruins of her home. How different her life had become, richer, fuller, more challenging and more rewarding than she could have imagined. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Although I sometimes wonder where you would have ended up if you hadn't heard me calling." "Best not to think about it," Elias said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some questions don't need answers, like what might have happened if I'd accepted Mrs. Green's invitation to wait out the storm at her house." "Exactly," Elias chuckled. "Though knowing that woman, she'd have found some other way to throw us together. She's convinced our marriage was her doing." "Let her think it," Catherine said with a smile. "It makes her happy." They fell silent, content in each other's company as they had been from those first days in the lined shack. The comfortable quiet between them had always been one of the foundations of their relationship, the ability to be together without the need for constant words. From inside the house came the soft cry of baby James, waking for his evening feeding. Catherine sighed and made to rise, but Elias stopped her. "I'll get him," he offered. "You rest." Catherine watched him go, her heart full. The cowboy who had pulled her from the rubble had become the center of her world, the foundation on which she had rebuilt not just a home but a life. And as the years passed, with more joys and challenges than either could have foreseen that winter day, Catherine and Elias Reed continued to build together a legacy of love that had started in the most unlikely circumstances, with a blizzard, a collapsed cabin, and two people who found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for.